Oh, sweetheart, this little fantasy island adventure of yours? It ends right here, right now. Private property means exactly that. Private, a concept apparently too advanced for some washed-up military nobody to comprehend. The woman in the $1,000 chartreuse linen suit, Victoria Sterling, the undisputed queen bee of Willow Creek, stood ankle-deep in my lake, oblivious to the fact that her imported leather pumps were sucking up the muddy lake bottom. Her platinum blonde hair was perfectly shellacked against the humidity, a rigid helmet of entitlement. She didn't just point a finger, she gestured with her whole arm, as if she were condemning a peasant in a poorly staged opera. Pack up your little camping gear and find somewhere else to play, ex-soldier, she commanded, her voice cutting across the placid water of Lake Serenity. This island belongs to the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, and your trespassing days are officially over. You know, we've tolerated Silas being out here for years, but a new generation means new rules, and frankly, we need this space for our annual 4th of July fireworks viewing. I was standing there, rooted to the spot on Islewood, property that's been in my family for over 60 years, trying to keep the military training from taking over. The urge to simply ignore the absurd display and get back to work. I was watching this overdressed stranger wade through water she doesn't own to deliver ultimatums about land she's never legally controlled. I thought about my grandfather, Silas Vance, and how he would have handled this mess, probably with more patience than I was feeling. Behind her, 3 other board members, this Sterling Council, huddled on the shoreline like nervous geese, clipboards already wilting in the heat, waiting for their president to handle the dirty work of intimidation. Mrs. Sterling, I said, keeping my voice level despite the escalating absurdity. I think there might be some confusion about property boundaries here. Victoria let out a laugh that could have stripped paint off a battleship. Confusion? Honey, the only confusion here is whatever fairy tale some slick scammer sold you. The Willow Creek HOA has maintained complete management authority over this entire lake system since 1985, including every square inch of what you're standing on. We control the access, the docks, the water rights, and everything in between. Her confidence was impressive, the kind that comes from never having been questioned, never having had to justify her authority beyond simply claiming it. But what she didn't know was sitting in Silas's old, waterproof field case, documentation that was about to transform their 40-year property grab into their single, most expensive mistake. My name is Alex Vance. 3 months ago, I inherited Islewood, a rugged island in the middle of Lake Serenity, complete with a 19th-century stone cottage and a 40-year-old property dispute. The cottage was my grandfather Silas's retreat since 1963, long before Willow Creek Estates existed. Silas Vance hadn't just been an Army Corps of Engineers surveyor. He was a legend in his field, a man whose passion was finding the single, undeniable truth buried beneath layers of bureaucratic mistakes. He measured everything twice, documented it 3 times, and filed it 4 times. It puzzled me that he'd left me GPS coordinates that seemed 3.7 meters off every official county map. The inheritance came with a cryptic note. Alex, precision matters more than people realize. What looks like an error today might be an insurance policy tomorrow. Check the basement workshop. Everything you need is waiting there. This 3.7-meter discrepancy wasn't carelessness. It was intentional. I had no idea he'd left me a legal weapon waiting 60 years for this exact moment. The first sign of trouble came Tuesday morning. I spotted Victoria in her blinding chartreuse, approaching in a ridiculous pontoon boat, flanked by her counsel, Priscilla Hart, Cordelia Finch, and Arthur West. "Morning, sweetie," she called, with grating false cheer. Vacation time is officially over. They beached the boat, surveying the cottage with a proprietary air. Silas kept this place in better condition than I expected, she purred, running a finger along the stone wall. Such a shame he never understood community cooperation. It was pure reconnaissance. They were mapping their target, treating my inheritance like a piece of common property already designated for conversion into a new picnic area or community fishing pier. "Mrs. Sterling," I said, "this is private property. You don't have permission to be here." Cordelia laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "Sweetie, we don't need permission. The Willow Creek HOA has maintenance authority over all community water resources." They showed me a laminated document claiming my island was the Lustron Recreational Zone under HOA authority since 1985. The documentation looked official, fancy fonts, impressive seals, but the text seemed slightly blurry in places. When you've dealt with enough military documentation, you develop an eye for paperwork that doesn't quite add up. I pulled out the actual federal property deed. You might want to compare your map with a real federal property survey. Even Arthur looked interested. Victoria's voice tightened. Federal survey? I don't know what paperwork game you're trying to play, but no game, I interrupted, unfolding Silas's original survey from 1963. Just GPS coordinates, boundary markers, and documentation that's been sitting in a basement workshop for 60 years, waiting for someone to question it. I saw the first crack in their certainty. Victoria focused on the plat map like she was trying to decode a foreign language. The morning ended with them retreating, Victoria delivering a promise that sounded like a definitive threat. This conversation is far from over, Mr. Vance. We protect our community interests very seriously. By Thursday morning, their resources had manifested. Professional-grade metal, no trespassing, signs decorated my island shoreline like unwelcome, expensive party decorations. They declared war on my property rights, using my own land as the battlefield. I finally understood that Silas's slightly off GPS coordinates weren't a mistake. They were a trap, and now I had to spring it. When I finally went down to the basement workshop, the air was thick with the scent of pine shavings, machine oil, and aged paper. It was a cathedral of meticulousness. Every hand tool was polished, every drawer labeled. The $1,000 surveying equipment, the transit level, the vintage theodolites, was preserved in museum quality, ready for deployment. Amidst this perfection, I found a heavy-duty lockbox, a military-issue field safe, designed to survive a hurricane. The label read, "For the next owner only. May you finish what I could not." I spent days studying Silas's maps. Following his systematic logic, I noticed the markers converged toward one specific point, the basement wall behind the workbench. I found loose bricks, carefully mortared to look solid. The bricks lifted out to reveal a waterproof cavity, Silas's version of a treasure chest. Inside was 18 months of systematically gathered counterintelligence, documentation that would crush any legal challenge. I found certified mail receipts showing monthly attempts by Silas to pay HOA assessments to an organization that had been legally dissolved way back in 1998, all returned with address unknown stamps. The paper trail proved the current HOA had been operating without proper corporate authority for over 2 decades. The bank statement copies were even worse. They proved payments had been systematically redirected, not to an official community account, but to Lakefront Management Services LLC, a shell company registered in Victoria Sterling's husband's name. This wasn't just overreach. This was a straight-up, decades-long financial scam disguised as neighborhood governance. Original 1983 development plans explicitly excluded Islewood and the lake from HOA jurisdiction, designating them as private property to remain under individual ownership in perpetuity. The current HOA documentation was barely worth the paper it was printed on. The final folder, Legal Action Final Phase, contained the true masterstroke. Silas's corrected survey, meticulously cross-referenced against federal data points, proved that the 3.7-meter variance wasn't a county mistake. It was a historical correction. This small, seemingly insignificant distance changed everything. It didn't just move my boundary line. It redrew the entire shoreline's legal definition. The stone causeway, the single, low-lying man-made bridge the HOA used for their boat launches, their maintenance vehicles, and their entire dock system, was, in fact, definitively, irrevocably, on my private property. Silas hadn't just protected his island. He had used precision surveying to cut the HOA's central nervous system, their access, right out from under them. It was a 60-year-long legal trap, and the spring mechanism was finally tripped. Thursday morning, Bradford Hutchins from Lakefront Management Services called. "Mr. Vance, any attempt to suddenly restrict community access could result in significant legal challenges. We're talking established precedent, community investment, and potential damages easily reaching well into 6 figures," he warned. The threat was obvious. "That's interesting," I replied. "I'm having trouble finding any official documentation that supports the HOA's claims." I've been working with some professional surveying work conducted by Army Corps of Engineers personnel, the kind that would be admissible in federal court. The subsequent silence was telling. Bradford immediately shifted. Mr. Vance, I think we should schedule an in-person meeting. These boundary disputes can be resolved through reasonable compromise, rather than expensive litigation. Friday morning, federal surveyors arrived. Victoria and her legal team, including Preston Caldwell, radiating four-figure billable authority, positioned themselves on the mainland, visibly distraught. I had requested an official boundary verification, a routine process that had sent Victoria into full crisis mode. The federal surveyors, Jane Brennan and Thomas Keller, worked the causeway with the silence and efficiency of a surgical team. Then, Thomas Keller paused, looked down at his screen, then slowly up at me. "Sir," he said, the careful neutrality in his voice amplifying the gravity of his words. "We're showing a significant variance from the recorded county boundaries, 3.7 meters northeast of the documented property line." Victoria's sharp intake of breath was audible across the water. She let out a strained, strangled sound. "That's impossible. We have 4 decades of community management." Jane Brennan, packing away her tripod, delivered the killing blow with clinical detachment. "The variance is significant enough to put the mainland approach causeway entirely within your property boundary, Mr. Vance. That includes the boat launch area and approximately 40 meters of what has been treated as community common space." The silence was crushing. Victoria's face flushed a violent, mottled red that clashed horribly with her suit. Bradford frantically pulled out his phone, already dialing their expensive firm. "Maintaining someone else's property," I called back, "doesn't establish ownership rights. It just makes you very helpful neighbors who've been taking excellent care of my land, on my dime." That afternoon, I filed the Notice of Property Access Restriction, prepared using Silas's legal templates. It was legally bulletproof. Unauthorized access to the causeway would, as of 6 p.m., constitute a federal trespassing violation. Saturday morning, Victoria and her flotilla returned. "We're prepared to offer a reasonable compromise," Bradford announced, proposing a formal easement agreement with compensation. "That's an interesting proposal," I called back, pulling out the official notice. "But you might want to review some recent documentation before we discuss compromise agreements." As of 6 o'clock yesterday evening, access to private property via the Willow Creek Causeway is restricted to authorized personnel only. Unauthorized access constitutes federal trespassing and will be prosecuted accordingly. Cordelia's voice cracked. "You can't just cut off lake access. We have established rights." "You have established patterns of behavior," I corrected, letting Silas's conclusion finally ring true. "But patterns of behavior don't create legal ownership, especially when they're based on incorrect survey data that's been waiting 60 years. This is blackmail." Priscilla shrieked, her voice thin with panic. "You're holding the entire community hostage." "I'm exercising legal property rights documented since 1963, I replied, delivering Silas's planned response to their desperation. Victoria's commanding presence completely deflated. Her 4 decades of assumed authority crumbled under the weight of one undeniable federal finding. By Monday, surrounded by her expensive lawyers, the HOA tried every legal argument. They pushed community investment claims and established usage precedent. But Silas's documentation systematically demolished them, including the financial records proving fraud and mismanagement. Those financial records were obtained without proper authorization, Bradford stammered, trying to throw doubt on the evidence. "Actually," I replied, "these are public records that any community member could have requested at any time over the past 40 years. The fact that nobody bothered to review them doesn't make the records inadmissible. It just makes the oversight more obvious." 40 years of assumed authority collapsed. By Thursday, Victoria resigned, citing philosophical differences. Bradford immediately pivoted, offering me property management services. The community meeting drew massive attendance. Martha Blackwood, an elderly resident, asked, "Mr. Vance, what exactly do you intend to do with your property rights? Are you planning to cut off community access entirely, or is there some way we can work together?" Silas's final note echoed in my mind. Precision matters, but so does community. Use the authority to build something better. I have no interest in destroying community lake access, I announced, presenting a formal easement agreement. It required modest annual fees for maintenance, strict environmental protection, and, most importantly, transparent, democratic management. Community decisions would be made through regular meetings where every resident had an equal vote, replacing the autocratic rule of the board. The neighborhood transformed from a dictatorship to a true community. Sterling West was elected as the new community coordinator, establishing monthly financial reports. A year later, the anniversary community meeting was held on my island. Community costs were 30% lower, lake quality was dramatically improved, and residents were highly satisfied with their new, democratic governance. Victoria Sterling had moved to a retirement community in Arizona, apparently finding democratic governance and financial transparency incompatible with her management philosophy. Standing on the porch, watching my neighbors, I finally understood Silas's greatest gift. Not the legal trap, but the demonstration that communities function best when built on legal reality and democratic consent. The 3.7-meter survey variance evolved into something much more significant, a model for community transformation. Now, here's my question for you. Alex used the full force of federal law, the legal nuclear option, to dismantle the HOA and force democratic change. Was he right to use this overwhelming legal power to achieve a positive outcome for the entire community, or should he have pursued a more immediate, less aggressive compromise? Let me know in the comments below. Did Alex go too far, or was this the only way to truly solve a problem that had been festering for 40 years? Drop your opinion. Hit that like button if you think Silas Vance was a genius, and subscribe for more stories about how legal precision meets community cooperation. Thanks for watching.